Welcome to the C Word, the Conservators podcast. Today we're talking about portfolios. I'm Jenny Mathiasson, an objects conservator based in South Yorkshire.
I'm Chloe Rumsey, an objects conservator based in Greater Manchester.
And I'm Christina Rizek, an objects conservator based in Cambridgeshire.
Yeah, welcome to the show, everyone. So today we've got a special guest host with us. Julia, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, my name is Julia Jabłońska. I'm a new paid lead conservator based in Manchester.
Very cool.
Welcome to the show.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you.
We were going to talk about portfolios today, but first I thought we'd do a little bit of news.
We have news?
Well,
we have news.
Why not? I was going to say a couple of episodes ago, we mentioned that we were going to do a meetup at the Icon 19 conference in Belfast.
Which we're also at.
Yes, Christina's at twice. Because check you out. Anyway, we've teamed up with the Emerging Professionals Network for Icon, so Icon EPN group, to do a meetup together. And it will be Thursday, the 13th of June, from about 7:30 at Granny Annie's Kitchen, which is right next to the Belfast Waterfront Conference Centre, pretty much. We would love to see you there. If you want to come. If you want to come out and have a couple of drinks with us, then you are so welcome, and we would love to see you there, basically.
So excited.
Yeah. I also want to throw out there that ICOM, so that's with an M, not with an N, are working on the new definition of what a museum is. This is kind of a work in progress for them, how to define a museum. And there's been some interesting debates in the museum community about what a museum should indeed be, how we define it, and that sort of thing. And I'm honestly constantly a little bit fascinated that collections seems to be a very dirty word right now. That's I mean, I guess there's a debate we shouldn't really be having right now, because like that could be an episode in and of itself.
Yeah, let's make that an episode. Season 6.
But I do find it very fascinating that obviously it's all people based and about democratizing museums and all that stuff. But it feels very much like collections don't even get to be in the definition anymore, because
what better tool to do that with?
Well, yeah, that's how I feel.
Historical
That's not how other people feel, but there you go. But yeah, they're working on a new definition, and I'm very curious to see what that will boil down to. Does anyone else have any news?
We're recording on the 5th of May and last recorded at the end of March. So the big thing that happened in between is obviously the fire at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, which kind of still feels like massive news, but also kind of feels a bit like old news now, because it was, I guess, getting on for 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, my perception of it was that whilst it was happening, there was a huge push to donations for the repair and everything, because no one knew how bad it would be. And I don't know what the updated forecast, I suppose, of the damage, but I think a lot of the really, really old stuff survived, didn't it?
I mean, it seems like they did get a lot out. I haven't seen a formal report on what they actually got out, but because they had good emergency planning and good drills with, local fire crews, then they got stuff out. They knew what to do, which was excellent to hear. Obviously, the devastation is quite massive. It's difficult to appreciate from afar, but all you can really tell, I suppose, is there's just as much scaffolding as there was before, and it doesn't have a spire anymore, and it has significantly less roof. That's about what you can see from the ground. And then there are lots of sad people. So that's the update on that at the moment. But yeah, it does seem like they've got donations coming out of their ears. And if anything, this has highlighted the need for skilled stonemasons and stuff like that, which is, a trade that isn't going super strong anymore. So there's been a certain amount of awareness about how heritage job skills, the old style ones, are very much still necessary and still good to have around. So I suppose in some ways that's kind of a positive, that it's kind of gotten people thinking about, actually skilled stonemasons is still a thing that we need. It's not all concrete blocks and prefabs. It's when this sort of thing happens, we need those people in between episodes.
Also highlighted to me, I just want to say that there's money out there if people love the thing enough. And it is it's obviously brilliant, absolutely brilliant, that people do sort of rise up and support, but also, there's been so many things that have been damaged, and they might not be maybe as romantic as Notre Dame, but they're still of huge importance. So I think that's something that we need to explore as a sector, what it is that they want to fund, and I mean, how to communicate. Maybe
it is a really good point, because I feel like entirely by chance, I think, there was a BBC article on the same day as the Notre Dame fire broke out about a fire-damaged church somewhere in England, right? But like a parish church, like a really old medieval building that was damaged by fire, and how they really struggled to raise any funds for, repairs or for anyone to care. The contrast between that and people throwing, like millionaires having a bidding war over who could give the most money to Notre Dame at the same time as it was still on fire. Was like the contrast was so dramatic.
I've got 2 points really about that. And one is that I think with Notre Dame, it's an iconic building and so on, but I think people were shocked by it because so many people have been to visit it as well. Yeah. So anybody who goes to Paris will probably go and visit Notre Dame as well. And I mean, it became a kind of very minor meme almost on Twitter, that idea of people being shocked about it because they'd been to visit it and putting up a photo of them in front of the building, whatever. And I saw some people satirizing this in a kind of, oh my God, I can't believe Notre Dame is on fire. I was there only 5 years ago, kind of, that kind of. People want to make that kind of connection, and I think where they have that kind of personal connection, it's always going to be easier to find support for restoration efforts.
No, absolutely.
But the other thing I also saw, and this is also on Twitter in particular, I saw a bit of a backlash against this. Because, as Jenny says, there was this kind of bidding war with people giving vast sums of money for this. And I saw a big backlash against that, with people saying, it's only a building. Why aren't these people giving money for climate change efforts? Because at the same time, we had the huge publicity for things like Extinction Rebellion and so on. And there are all the climate protests and so on. So I think for a lot of people, it became this quite kind of unsavory contrast between what is ultimately just a building. Yes, it's a piece of immensely significant cultural heritage, and also if you're a Catholic, it's a very important part of your religious heritage, and for Paris it's a hugely iconic building and so on, and I'm not denying that, but all of these people falling over themselves to give vast sums of money for what is just a building when there are other areas that struggle to get exposure or money at all, I think became quite... I saw a real backlash against this, where people were almost turning against cultural heritage as a word. I mean, it's a false opposition, obviously. We don't have to put cultural heritage and people into opposition. You can fund both of them if you have enlightened enough government systems and so on. It doesn't have to be that you have all of these swishy, amazingly restored buildings and children are shoeless and hungry and so on. You can do both. Yeah. But I think for a lot of people, they ended up sort of putting them into opposition. And I wonder if that's actually backfired a bit and sort of lessened the support for the conservation efforts.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And we do, of course, live in very tricky times, but I'm actually, of course, very glad that the climate change stuff is actually very much at the forefront of people's thoughts right now. It's amazing. But yeah, it did create that interesting juxtaposition. Right, should we perhaps get on with our portfolios?
Let's do it.
Before I came into conservation, I thought portfolios were for designers and artists, and I could not imagine that it was for anything else.
Yep.
And I was extremely confused when it was a thing.
Same.
In fact, I remember when I still lived in Sweden and I was applying, or indeed actually just looking at universities to apply for, some universities, wanted you to have a portfolio already as part of your submission.
What?
And I mean, there were no real guidelines.
What?
Well, yeah, quite, because you're a student,
I've done literally nothing.
Yeah, exactly. Of nothing. Of the bits of volunteering I've done, I guess. Of course, that was too terrifying for me, which is probably a large reason why I ended up doing archaeology and heritage management for my first degree, because I was like, that's too scary. I don't have anything to show these people if that's what they want. I mean, not everyone wanted that, but it was a daunting thing to look at, especially as a student coming in from abroad. So that's probably part of the reason why I ended up doing conservation, the kind of conservation we talk about, for my master's degree instead, because that was just too terrifying for me to figure out at that point. It is this interesting thing, and I think it's possibly even more of a thing in America, where people are expected to kind of come in with experience kind of already, in a way, pre-programmed stuff and all that.
I'd love to hear, by the way, if anyone has any thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not just America. We had an intern from Germany last year who was doing her master's at Durham, but had already done a year's pre-program internship in Germany because that's what you do. And there's this whole sort of infrastructure of these internships which you can apply for and get and so on because it's so expected that you will do it. So she came into her degree at Durham already having quite a lot of stuff on her plate, I think.
Yeah, so it does work differently in different parts of the world, certainly. But yeah, so before conservation, I did not realize that portfolios were things that weren't just for people who make interior designing things or web pages or clothes or, that sort of thing. I didn't know that a portfolio could be for anything that we do, which became very obvious as we started talking about it on our degree courses. Where I had even less of an idea what a portfolio would entail or look like. It was actually a fairly terrifying part of the education process, I felt.
I found it daunting because it was sort of, we were taught by our lecturers at Cardiff how to do a portfolio, what employers are after. It was very much like, this is a good opportunity for you to present the kind of person you are. And I was like, what? How do I present the kind of person I am on paper?
I do feel like it was quite general and deliberately vague, I feel, because you're not really meant to produce what everyone else is producing. You're meant to do something that's yours.
Yeah.
But that's a really hard thing to do when you don't really know enough about what you're up to in a way. So I found that very difficult. There wasn't really much online to look at. There wasn't, design portfolios or that sort of thing. Like no one put up a conservation portfolio in those days, so you could see what one even looked like what you were meant to aim for. So I had really no idea what the production value was of what I should aim to present. So it's all well and good to say it should have some conservation treatments that you're proud of and maybe some other bits as well that are useful to employers. Wow, that's not an instruction. Like, that's just, what? So I felt very panic-stricken about the entire thing, and I feel like I did not make a good portfolio at the time. I still don't think I do a good portfolio, but I do a passable one. So actually, before we start talking about our portfolios, Christina, what was yours like?
Actually, I'm just getting mine down off the shelf because I haven't had the heart to get rid of them, but actually they're completely useless as actual objects. So I trained at UCL, where it was a 3-year training program at the time, and you did a 1-year MA followed by a 2-year MSc. And I did, as part of that, and I think this is one of the problems, is that the portfolio was actually part of our assessed work. So it was just trying to do too many things. It was trying to tick all the boxes for the assessed academic work and also to show off your work and so on. And it ended up not really being very useful as a job portfolio. So I have a portfolio from 2003 to 4, and I'm just measuring it. And it is 3.5 centimeters thick.
What?
So,
oh my God.
I mean, for a start, that's from the first year of my MSc. Now, bear in mind, I was a bit of a swot who went ludicrously overboard for all of my academic work.
Christina, you? No, surely not.
And so some of this is sort of, like title pages and so on for all the sections, but it contains presentations of some of the objects I'd done during the lab year, but they were in the form of, I think from memory, 5,000 word essays. The point is, it was great for my MSc. I got a very good mark. I was highly happy with that. But then you turn up to interviews carrying this massive weighty tome, and somebody says, tell me about an object you've treated, and you're like leafing through this enormous thing and through all of these 5,000 word essays trying to find something useful about your object. It's absolutely useless from that point of view. It serves no good practical purpose. And then at the end, we had to present brief individual object things, but we were limited to 2 photos per report, per object. And so most people did a before photo and an after photo. And actually, that's completely useless in terms of portfolios. Those aren't the particularly useful things to show. Before treatment can show you the condition it was in before treatment. After treatment shows that you've made some kind of visible change to it, hopefully. Although some of my treatments, there wasn't actually much of a visible change.
That's always disappointing.
So you end up with two kind of almost identical photos.
Look, brown thing, also a brown thing.
Exactly. So from the point of view of being able to show potential employers what you've done, that's actually not very useful at all. And what is more useful would be having more photos, less text, and the ability to put in more in progress photos where you're showing the treatment in progress. So it's sat on my shelf ever since 2003, and I have not once got it out to show an employer. I'm just looking at my portfolio. We had to do another one for the second year of the MSc, and this one is a mere 2 centimetres thick, so I'd obviously eased off a bit in the interim. It contains a learning review, which all about my internship year and reflections on my development as a conservator and so on. All again very useful for the academic degree that I was working towards. Great for an MSc, absolutely useless again for a potential employer. They don't really care about your personal development over the course of your internship year. And then I can see there's loads and loads of text and contextual information I've gone into researching this cartonnage mummy case I treated, loads of stuff from the original excavation reports and so on. But yeah, basically not very useful as an actual portfolio. So it's quite interesting that I had to produce one of these portfolios each year as part of my academic degree, but they're a very different kind of thing from what you understand by portfolio. Yeah. And so I went out looking for jobs, and you would say, bring a portfolio. And I didn't really have a model to base that on, because all I had were these ridiculous items.
We have Julia to thank for this brilliant idea for an episode topic, because she came to see me in my studio a few months ago, and you presented this as an idea, and I thought, yes, that is excellent. So who better to guest host than Julia herself?
Well, I guess the reason why I pitched the idea is because of the anxiety that portfolios have caused me since I started applying for jobs. I think the anxiety has eased up a bit after I've had some positive feedback from different conservators, but I think I have to agree with the rest of it. There isn't that much to look at in terms of what is expected. It wasn't really covered in detail during my degree either. The portfolios presented as part of my degree, similarly, they were quite different. They weren't what you would expect. A lot of text, a lot of writing, a lot of explaining that perhaps isn't useful in the 5 minutes the interviewers have to see your work. So yeah, when I started getting interviews, I did have to produce something completely different, and I really didn't know what it was. And I think there are also a lot of challenges for new conservator when they produce that, because they might have. So in my case, I felt like I was having trouble in getting all my experience across, because a lot of my experience came from volunteering, workshops. Sometimes it weren't full treatment, but I did a lot of work that was quite difficult to present. My challenge was how to maximize that, how to show off it in the best way possible. And there aren't really any examples. Even online, there are examples of portfolios of private conservators that are aimed at clients. Yeah. They're not interested in the same things. Yeah, so they are quite different as well. So for that reason, I thought there isn't that much material for us to actually consult when we start working on that. And it would be really useful to get people's opinions and advice.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm really interested in, because you did a paintings conservation specific degree, didn't you?
Yes.
Were you taught, what was the advice that you were given in your education? Because I imagine that as yours is a specialism as opposed to general objects conservation, do you have quite a different kind of portfolio then that's very conservation specific? What was your advice that you were given?
Don't remember having specific sessions on that.
Right.
So there was some advice on how to present the portfolio, how to present it in a professional way, to use good quality images, to use useful images that actually show progress, to take good images and good quality images before and after, and have proper documentation. We didn't actually go through specifics of how you go about it.
Right. That sounds very similar to what we did actually. Yeah.
I think one of you said earlier about it's a way to present yourself or what kind of person you are.
Yeah.
And I think that's a bit scary.
Yeah.
I don't know what person they want, and I think it's slightly difficult, as if we were expected to guess what they want, and the person who guesses best gets the job.
Yeah.
Well, I'm actually intrigued by that advice, because I don't know whether it means show what kind of person you are in terms of your personality and the things that are to do with you outside conservation, or whether it literally means just show what kind of conservator you are.
So advice that I've had, or I suppose like things that people have said to me, so from both sides of the table, as it were, both interviewers and interviewees or people applying to things and teachers, is that they want, it's a good opportunity to show your personality, in that when people are interviewing you, they're trying to obviously see how competent you are, whether you fit the job description and whether you could do the job, but also whether you'll be able to fit in or whether you'll be a nice person to work with. And each to their own, basically. I think the interviewers are as different as the interviewees. So it you know, Christine, you probably want, I imagine you'll want to, you know, a academic focus, but then I've definitely spoken to people that say things like, well, you can teach people how to do various conservation skills or gain experience. You can introduce them to different opportunities for experience, but you can't make them a nice person, or you can't you can't sort of make them interesting to work with, as it were.
I'm just interested to know how you're supposed to be able to demonstrate this through a portfolio. I can understand that some of your personality might come out while you're presenting the portfolio, because it's quite common to be asked in an interview, okay, could you talk me through one of the objects in your portfolio or one of the projects in your portfolio? Could you present it to me in the thing? And I can see how that might give people an inkling of how good you are at explaining things to other people, how good you might be at talking to others and outreach and so on. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, most portfolios follow a fairly standard, limited format, I would have thought. So I would have thought the scope for expressing your personality more broadly would have been quite limited. And I haven't seen anybody turn up with like a pink, sparkly unicorn portfolio, for an example, or, you know, or a kind of goth portfolio, or, you know, I'm just interested to know how you would express that you're friendly through the medium of a portfolio. It just seems like the interview itself would be a better way to do that, and I wouldn't put so much weight on the portfolio.
These are really good questions, and I remember, right, so I'll briefly try to describe my first portfolio that I made for the cause, but with the intent for it to be something you show employers. So whilst this was something we did as part of our degree, it was for employers, not for our lecturers, really. Yeah. So it was meant to make us more employable kind of immediately, because we'd already be launching into the world with this thing between us and the employer, like shouting wildly, we're good, please hire us. Yeah. And I remember that I tried to inject some personality, by which I mean personal touches, into the portfolio. And the way I did that, you may have noticed that I do the art for the show, was I put little bits of artwork in as, say, icons that meant time taken on treatment or treatment method or materials used. So instead of wasting more words on that, I made little icons for it and stuff like that. So I attempted to kind of make it more me, in that I illustrated some of the answers.
It's adorable.
That was my attempt at injecting some more me into this and making it also slightly more memorable. I mean, it did not work, because that was not a good portfolio. But, well, first of all, you've only done about 5 things at that stage. So there's very little you can talk about. I mean, I think most of the things I put in there were probably things I did in my internship, because those were the slightly more exciting things at that point. But so I feel like I fell for all the tropes. Like, I bought a kind of portfolio case that's more like what artists use, but just so that was sturdier and it could travel with me. But in actual fact, it was far too big, because as soon as something is A4 sized, anything that covers A4 is massive and doesn't fit in any bag you'll ever bring to an interview, which means you have to carry the thing on a train, which is embarrassing. It was just too sturdy in some ways. It was too posh. And then inside I went for like really high quality paper, because we were told that think about the quality of what you're trying to present. So I went for really high quality paper, which was lovely, but also didn't quite work with the printer ink. So it was like it slightly made the images too dark, and it was a bit of a bizarre failure. you only have about 5 things to present at that point, so it kind of doesn't matter how you present them. They're still the same Roman nail that everyone does, and the same bloody silver coin that everyone got. You know, like it's very samey, and you still probably have before and after where it's just slightly less brown. Because you haven't done anything that's extraordinary yet, and that's fine. That is fine.
You just described so much of my conservation career,
and that is fine because sometimes we just don't make things look super amazing all the time, and things are not that dramatic on a student level. And because they're not supposed to be. You're learning, but so it's difficult to work with. And then I think I popped in like an example of some report or like pictures of me holding a pest trap or something in an attempt to show people that, look, I know how to identify insects, even though that's not what it tells you. There were some action shots in there, and that's about it. So it was an abysmal failure as far as the portfolio went. I took it to interviews and I hated it. I hated it with every fiber of my being. So what I started doing, by the way, a piece of advice that we were given was always keep your portfolio up to date. So keep making these pages so they're ready to print out whenever you need to go to your next job interview and that sort of thing. Like as you're doing little bits and bobs, always keep it up to date. That was the thing. And actually, yes, but actually I kind of reinvent mine whenever I go somewhere because I want it to be about what they want, and I try to pitch it at them. So, and sometimes people don't even remember or know to ask for a portfolio, which is also entertaining. It really depends on where you go for jobs as well. So, for example, in the job that I have now, they didn't ask for a portfolio. They were so pleased that I brought one because they had no idea that was an option. It's always really nice to impress people when you're like, I'm just doing the standard thing, but I'm really glad you're appreciating it, because usually people don't give a shit.
So you're working somewhere though where you're the only conservator.
Yes,
and so
exactly.
I think portfolios are very much for the benefit of other conservators, aren't they?
But it meant that I could show them what I could do in a really quite visual way, because they didn't have the conservation expertise. They were just desperate for a conservator who could do the kinds of things that they had in their collection. And honestly, what I did in that one was I got one of those like the horrible plastic folders that you get from like WH Smith's, if those still exist, from a stationery shop, like something quite standard, because I wasn't trying to be flashy, and I printed on regular old paper and I just made it functional. It was a functional piece of work which had good images still, had minimal information, but I could talk around them. At the end, I had some very brief reports, by which I mean reports made for people who aren't conservators, because I knew they didn't have one. So the whole point was I need to be able to show them that I can produce things that they can understand. It was an important point to get across that, look, I can produce a 1-page report that has a nice graph that shows you everything that you need to know and a recommendation at the bottom. I'm done. Boom. Mic drop. Out. And that was a selling point. And that's not going to work everywhere, because some people, especially if you're if you're being interviewed by other conservators, they might need something much more specific, like whole treatment proposals in detail, who knows. But do always tailor it to where you're going. And I knew that they didn't have a conservator, so that's why that worked for me. So yeah, always pitch it to the people that you're actually seeing.
Yeah, I do agree with the updating of the portfolio every time. I think it's every time you apply, you have to think about what they want. Sometimes it's not very clear what they want.
No, that's true.
That is a worry. But it was really reassuring to hear about how student portfolios will not be groundbreaking treatments, and that's okay. I think that's kind of a trap that people fall into. I definitely did. I look at myself and I was like, oh, it's not good enough. Yeah, I mean, I think if someone's just done 2 or 3 years of a course, there's only so much you can expect. So I think maybe that's a good piece of advice, to not work yourself up too much, because that's what is expected at a certain level of the career. And obviously, as you get more experience, that the portfolio will be changing as well.
In a way, portfolios are comforting then, in that they are, if you are somebody who gets nervous in interviews and you're worried that you're not going to be able to come across as well as you might want to, the portfolio is something solid that you can prepare in advance in your kind of best conditions, as it were, and bring with you, so that even if you get nervous in the interview and you can't think what it was you wanted to say, or you're worrying that you're not coming across as well as you could, you've always got the portfolio there
Yeah, I found it quite grounding. But can I ask, Julia, first, what do you have in your portfolio at the moment as you're in your position of applying to paintings conservation specific roles?
In my portfolio, I basically have all the bigger treatment that I've done. And I present before and after, and I present detailed photos of relevant details of my work. And I do have some text describing what I did, what materials I use, and I try not to use too much text, mostly focus on images and describing what's in it if that's necessary. I've also added some key skills and learning points at the end of each treatment.
Ooh,
so I kind of point out,
nice.
kind of summarize some bullet points of these are the key skills. And it's what I learned. This was the challenge that I had and worked around to kind of show that I do reflect on my work as clever. Well. And sometimes it's quite difficult. If we work a very, very long time on a treatment, painting conservation is very labour intensive. And sometimes we will spend a lot of time doing stuff and feeling like we're not getting anywhere because it's so slow. And sometimes you feel like you haven't learned anything from it. But if you take a few minutes at the end of the day just to have a thing and write things down, you realise that every day there is something that you have figured out. And if you do that and try to do it on a daily basis or whenever you work, then it's much easier later on to summarise that for the portfolio.
That's really great advice.
My portfolio is organised by treatment specific object, but that's not the only way to organise it. And a few people have suggested other ways to me. So, for instance, focusing on specific treatment types rather than objects. So, for instance, surface cleaning, consolidation, and either use a few examples or perhaps just show the best example from all your work. Focus on all the different types of treatment that you have experience with.
That's something that I imagine is really valuable and kind of, again, grounding for a specialist. I can't imagine that objects conservation would be able to do that because there are so many, like,
I don't know.
Consolidation could be like...
That's true, but like, you could have like a whole page of different ways of consolidating surfaces.
Yeah,
like,
that's true. Yeah.
You could go to town on that.
Yeah, that's true.
I think you could also do it by material as well.
Yeah, that's
I feel like
that
I'm
tended to be the thing that objects conservators do, I think.
And likewise, you could also do archaeological material versus ethnographic material versus social history material.
Yeah.
So I think there are actually alternative ways of splitting up objects as well that aren't just here's a single discrete project, here's another project.
Yeah, and of course some people go remedial and preventive and just have those two sections.
Mine, I think, is probably just a fairly standard objects conservation portfolio, but I've actually, the amount that mine covers actual conservation, practical conservation, is fairly low actually. So mine is split by conservation treatments, internship experience, and then other. So I've got my practical conservation split by archaeological material and like the stuff that I did during my degree, and then stuff that I've done since. But the majority of my conservation experience that I've done since has been like decants and large object movement and, you know, risk assessments and IPM and that sort of thing. So
are you almost more chronological?
I'm more yeah, basically at the moment.
Before graduation and after graduation.
Yeah.
BG and AG.
Yeah. I haven't actually updated mine for 2 years since I got my current job.
I haven't either.
I think it would probably be a really good practice to update it while I'm not under pressure to. And I realise that, you know, people listening to this who are looking for a job, like, all right, but from the point of view of what to include, I've got my conservation and I've got the things that I learnt during my internship. I actually didn't update it all that much as I went. I tended to have, it was a basic formula essentially that I moved around depending on what it was that people wanted from me. And that I think is one of the reasons why I found it quite grounding, because I sort of had it as, this is my experience. I know what I can expect. I know what I can talk about. And then I put things, as I went on, I put things like, this is my role, like a CV actually. Yeah, you're right. You're right, Julia. It's like a visual CV, isn't it? I put in sections of, like, this is my exhibitions conservation section of my experience, where I had loads of photographs of some of the displays that I had done and some of the working with curators and that sort of thing. The things that I've had people comment on have been like, this is a photograph of me like operating this large lifting equipment. Photos of IPM, methods of doing IPM. Advice that I've had has been like, put risk assessments in there so people can see that you do them and you can do them. I don't think the one I've got in mind is actually very good, but other people have suggested, I've heard things like, to demonstrate project management, include an email or like an example of your writing kind of thing, and how you would plan something, and potentially a Gantt chart as well to demonstrate how you plan your time. My portfolio at the moment does actually have a failure in it, which I don't think I've ever heard as advice to include, but it was as I was going... It's all about what you learn though, isn't it? Well, exactly, and the interesting thing was, it was as I was going for my current job, which is textiles conservation, I only had very bare bones textiles conservation experience in there. And one of the thing that was the failure was a textile object. So it gave me the opportunity to talk about the challenges that I found with it and say, well, this is what I found myself having to do, but this is what I wouldn't do again, kind of thing. So it wasn't, this is how great I am. It is always valuable to have your like loads of projects that you've done and examples of different types of conservation potentially and different projects that you've done, because people expect to see that. And it's like, oh yeah, that's comforting. We know that this person can do all those things. So they might not actually look very closely at the work you've done, because just its presence is a good sign. But the things that people have lingered on, as I said, are the things that are more unusual. Like, oh, this is this person working with contractors or risks or... Yeah,
I have dabbled with having a digital one, by which I mean, at one point I was too poor to have a printer, but that's not something you tell an employer when they're interviewing. So what I did was I do believe this was an iPad that was so old that it cannot be updated. Like, it's like the first iPad ever made. Like, that's an antique. But you could put pictures on it, so that's fine. So what I did was I just put pictures and like a collage of like each object on it, and I could talk around the pictures, and you could zoom in and stuff. So it was
that's really good,
vaguely helpful. I feel like I wasn't super comfortable with it, because it wasn't as tactile as sitting there with leafing through a paper thing. So that was a drawback for me. But at the same time, it was a good and much quicker way, arguably, of producing a portfolio that I could still take along, and they could still look at, and they could still sit and flick through in their own time, because there was nothing else on it. Like, that was literally all the content that was on the iPad. So that is also an option, and I have heard of other people successfully having digital ones, so they don't have to be paper based, which is just worth keeping in mind.
I mean, I've been to jobs where they've actually requested a digital portfolio, and that is increasingly common as a thing. And so I actually went to for one job, I went to the effort of making a digital portfolio, and then I actually pulled out of the job interview because I'd been given another job. So I never actually got to present it.
It probably doesn't take more time than any other portfolio prep, really.
No, to be honest, all portfolios take a huge amount of time. And it's a kind of example of the kind of unpaid extra work you have to do to get a job that is depressingly common in conservation, I think.
That is
the extra stuff you're expected to do. So
I found that portfolios take a shocking amount of time that you wouldn't expect, even just revising and redoing little things. Because you do want to make them look nice, and so that's why I feel like here's an appeal to all the conservators that are interviewing and asking for portfolios. Do provide some good feedback, because I've had a lot of experiences where either wasn't given any feedback, or I was just told that my portfolio was very good and wasn't given any specific advice or comments about what was good or what was bad about it. And I think, having spent so much time preparing and revising, it's just so very helpful to have some pointers, to know what to change, what to work on.
It's kind of taken for granted in a way, isn't it? That yes, you will provide your portfolio, here it is, great, thanks, flick, 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 and then no other comments made about it.
I've had interview feedback, but no one's ever said anything about the portfolio.
No.
Sometimes I wonder how important portfolio is and how things are presented versus the interview versus the actual treatments that are in there. It's quite difficult to know what carries the most weight when the decision is made.
It's just so expected that we'll have one, and it's so expected that there'll be photographs of everything you do and everything that you are able to do, that the sort of maybe, and it'd be great to hear back from people who have done lots of employment and interviewing type processes before. How important is it, and is it on your radar how much time it takes and how much people put into these things?
Just a reminder that there is actually an interview with two employers in one of our earliest episodes about emerging professionals, in which they did actually talk about portfolios and their impressions of what makes a good portfolio and a bad portfolio, and also how people come across in interviews as well.
Oh, brilliant.
So if you are currently applying for jobs, do go and listen to one of our emerging professionals episodes.
I think that was season 2,
I found that really interesting.
Wasn't it? Season 2, part 2 of emerging professionals.
Yeah, it was the second one. Yeah, that's right. I thought I'd throw in quickly that we did ask people some questions on Twitter in the run-up to this episode. One was we asked conservation students what they were taught about the portfolios when they studied and what they wish people would tell them about them. Lucy wrote in and said, we had weeks of lectures on putting portfolios together. We were marked on them when we'd finished. There was a bit of confusion about using first or third person and how much information employers want to see. So yeah, first or third person. That's a debate, which is interesting. I feel like I don't do either. I feel like I don't do. I treated this thing. I feel like it's treatment time 3 hours, treatment method, because it is obviously me doing it.
Yeah, mine's quite bullet pointy, so I don't think I've mentioned the person's not mentioned at all.
Ali gives some advice to students saying, always put your best foot forward. If it doesn't show your skills or wow, then don't put it in. And it's worthwhile to build a brand you can carry across to your business cards, resume, website, etc. Now that is a very forward-thinking type thing. We're now in a brand economy, so actually, we're all our own brand, aren't we now? So it's interesting, and that's putting a lot of forethought into it, which is arguably a good advice, because we all need to stand out from the crowd. So it's all about what we want to be, I guess, and what we want employers to think we are.
Yeah.
Can I add to that? Well, two things. One of them is a plug for my talk at my presentation at the ICON Belfast conference. Is called the 21st Century Conservator Training Skills and Employment. Basically, I'm going to be presenting the results of a survey of the job market over the last 10 years in the UK for conservation, and looking at what employers are looking for in conservators in job adverts, and how well that matches up with what conservators are actually trained to do, and what we think conservators ought to be doing as part of their jobs. Come to that.
Yeah, definitely come to that.
And as part of that, I've actually been collecting, obviously, job adverts and specifications. And I just wanted to mention a job that's been advertised currently, or quite recently anyway, in which it says in the job advert, in addition to the application form, you must provide an illustrated portfolio of your work, a maximum of eight sides of A4 in length, detailing 3 relevant projects. Ooh. So the idea is that you submit this with your application.
Oh,
quite a sort of lengthy thing. And so just wanted to put that out there as people are employers are possibly wanting to see some of this stuff in advance before you even get to the interview.
Yeah, interesting.
Wow. I think it's quite a sort of relaxing, well, not relaxing. It's quite it's less pressure, I think. It's a bit of a rest, isn't it, potentially for interviewers, that they've been talking to people for hours and hours. And obviously interviewing is literal hell for the interviewees, but for the interviewers it's hard going as well, because they might have 6 hours on the trot of talking to people about their work. And if that is interspersed with just simply chatting with people about the work that they've done with pictures, that must be a bit of a rest.
Is yours a thing that is printed out then? I mean, is yours a fixed thing? How is it?
Right, so I print mine out in A3 format. Ooh. So it's slightly bigger. I print a landscape, but 2 pages per sheet.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Basically.
I see. Yeah.
So then that's a bit more base. I got inspired by another conservator when I was designing mine. If I have a bigger treatment where I do a bit more to the object, then I will have 2 sheets of A3 just covering wide it and all the images there. So I print that out and I have that in PDF as well in case anyone requests to see in advance.
So are they like loose sheets or are they bound in some way? Or
so I have one of these quite basic folders and then I just swap them around depending on where I go and what the focus is, whether it's more of a contemporary art a focus or historical, or if there's anything that I suspect they might be more interested in, then I will put it at the beginning to make sure that I do get a chance to talk about it.
I think mine was boring in A4.
Yeah, mine's A4 as well. I like the fact I can sort of print out way more projects than I can actually fit in at any one time. I've also got mine split into sections called treatment and display, collection care, and research and professional engagement.
We asked conservators what they do with their portfolios. What do they include? What do they think they're useful? Digital paper? Do you tailor to each job or not? What about layout? And then Chloe asked an additional question about if you do provide photos or not. And Stephanie replied to that and said that I grew up in the generation of photo didn't happen.
Yeah.
So I feel that way about most things. It's one thing to say that you can do something is completely different to show that you can.
Yeah.
That is a massive problem though, because a lot of things that I do, I'm the only person in the room at the time.
Right.
I can't have someone else take my photo while that's happening.
I could genuinely have a full-on rant about this because I've had situations where I've described like, I have moved this thing from here to here. And the thing that got the, ooh, that's interesting, was a photograph of me using a pallet truck. Like this is really great. It's great that you can put photographs of yourself in these things, but they are literally always staged. Because you're not going to go, I'm going to move this really heavy, delicate object.
Yeah, please
take a photograph of me while I'm doing it. No, you don't do that. You focus on moving the object, and then you go, hang on, let me just like pose. I'm like posing for Jenny here. You pose for it, and that's why there is such a thing as the portfolio face that you pull when either photographers or friends taking your photograph.
Serious face, staring into the middle distance but looking focused.
It's interested and half smile.
Lucy says my portfolio has always been digital ever since undergrad. Craig says, as my recent work has been teaching and not treatment, I'm trying out topic-based pages like planning, training, engagement, and innovation. It's on paper, bullet points only, using I, but no photos of me. Oh, that's an interesting one. If you don't do object-based things, which, a lot of us don't periodically at the very least, but so that's interesting. And again, very difficult to get photos of you lecturing to people or that's or how do you even take a photo of yourself planning something? Is it you with a thinking face? That's basically impossible to illustrate other than here's a screenshot of a Gantt chart, that sort of level of thing. So that's a tricky one. Amy says having a portfolio was the best piece of advice I was given. Interviewers are always impressed and I think shows organization and a clear thought process. They can also act as prompts for examples during the interview process. I use photos of myself when possible. Proves to the interviewer that you can back up your talk. Also think it's very important to use first person. Shows you have confidence about your own work. That's so cool. I have a general portfolio that are tailored to each interview. Details are important, she says. Claire writes in and says, I do use a digital portfolio since 3 years now, including an About Me section, selected treatments with a few pictures of myself and general description, and a contact page. And then she says, I usually tailor a PDF abstract of it for applications. That's a clever one. Freya says, I think it's a great crutch and good reminder when you're a little bit nervous, which we've already talked about, so that's true. Ian says, I think you have to tailor to the job to best showcase your skill set. Oddly, I wasn't asked for one in my last job interview, which is sad because I had it already. And I was like, oh.
Yeah, it's a pain.
Yeah. I think I have once chickened out. I actively brought it. And because they didn't ask, I was too frightened to say, by the way, I have a portfolio with me. I think that was possibly one of my very first.
Lay it on the desk.
Yeah, that's what I do since, because I was very disappointed in myself for not having the confidence to fish it out of my bag and go, look, I have a thing. But it's a very weird situation to be in an interview. So Stephanie says, I have a physical portfolio and I have plans to create a digital one. I was not asked for a copy for the last couple of interviews I did, including the job I have. I tailor to the job, showing off skills and techniques that I think will be useful and makes me unique. I need to improve the layout. I currently have 1 page per object. Was recommended to change it to a 2-page spread so the photos can be larger. I make sure to include something about analysis and social media on each object shown instead of putting that info into separate sections. Oh, that's interesting to include a bit of what you've done there. Gloria says a portfolio is essential. It also says a lot about the professional person. And it's great to look at 10 years down the line from now and go, oh. And Nat says she has a digital one. And then we also asked people who recruit conservators, how important is a portfolio when it comes to hiring the right person for the job? What do you love seeing in them and what do you wish people didn't bother including? Jane says, I was disappointed by a very ill-focused portfolio. The interviewee kept flipping through page after page to look for things, certainly created a bad impression. And then Simon says, they're useful for early career conservators, but not necessary beyond that. CV and interview should tell you what you need to know. If you do take one to an interview, keep them short and use excellent relevant images. And Jane agrees that if it's not excellent, don't include it. I suppose that's later on in your career. Like, you don't have to include every Roman nail you've ever sandblasted. Like, you can trim it down to, like, your best work.
What does excellent mean?
That's up to you, isn't it?
I know, but that's the pressure, isn't it?
Yeah, no, that's true. Emily says, I definitely think it's beneficial to bring a portfolio. There's always a chance that what you have in there will help you answer a question or expand on your answer. Good to see evidence of work as application forms and sometimes interview questions can't get the full picture. I haven't yet seen anything in a portfolio I wish they hadn't shown me, but definitely make sure it's relevant to the job you're being interviewed for. It should be a working document that is tweaked and updated accordingly. Sarah says, whether analog or digital, I like seeing challenging treatments and well-written descriptions of what went well and what didn't. So see, there's your failure that comes in there. I like seeing process, show me how you think and approach complex projects. Give me a sense of how you'd react in real life and manage all aspects of a project. That's a much more human approach, I think.
Yeah.
So that's cool. M says that they have a range when they interview people. Some people bring portfolios and some don't. Seems more about how people use them. And she has an example. Someone in particular seamlessly incorporated it into their answers. Other used it as a repository of possible answers, which worked less successfully. My conclusion this time around is to bring in use a portfolio if you can use it successfully. So there it seems to be all about how slick you are.
Yeah.
Which is terrifying because I'm not very slick in an interview anyway. I'm terribly nervous wreck.
I don't think I'm slick ever.
Angela says, during interviews, I personally don't want to see more than 2 A4 pages per object or treatment and no more than 3 examples. That's 6 pages, but 36 for me to be enthused about when interviewing 6 candidates. Has to have an immediate impact or wow factor, a few words, loads of images. So those were the kind of responses that we got from social media. And
really
I think,
interesting.
I think they were really useful. So thanks to everyone who responded. That was really, really good to hear.
Thank you very much.
And again, if you have anything to add now that you've listened to this episode, then tweet us, email us, anything. Grab us in the street. Tell us, shout in our faces what you think about portfolios, because we would love to hear about it. And as an extra bonus feature today, Icon Emerging Professionals Network recently had a portfolio-based meetup. They had one in London and one in Lincoln, and basically we asked if one of them could send us a little summary or review of what that actually looked like. And very kindly, Rebecca has written a little summary for me to read out from her. Hello, listeners of the Seaward podcast. Firstly, we must say a huge thank you to everyone who came to our portfolio meetup last Wednesday. Our first ever event could not have gone better, and we're looking forward to holding our next one. As it happens, this will be a joint social with the Seaward podcast in Belfast. We will be heading to Granny Annie's on Thursday the 13th of June at 7:30 p.m, so look forward to meeting some of you there. Back to portfolios and our event last Wednesday. The creation of a portfolio can seem like a daunting prospect for many emerging conservators, but there's no doubt that having one to use at interview or show a prospective client is important. How can you present your skills, experience and projects in a way that showcases the best of what you have to offer? This is what we aim to address as participants met at UCL in London and Coffee by the Arch in Lincoln to discuss all things portfolios. lending a professional eye to proceedings were Renata Peters, UCL, Duygu Kamakoglu from British Museum, and Pip MacDonald from Lincoln Conservation. With their combined conservation experience, it was a fantastic chance for participants to gain advice from those established in the field. Both sessions started with general critique and some portfolio examples, what worked particularly well in this portfolio and what could have been improved. The group discussion that followed was very constructive and touched on many aspects of creating a body of work. Branding, attention to detail, the inclusion of soft skills, going digital, and the importance of great photography, which is some of the areas discussed. As there are far too many to list here, documents summarising these key points will be available soon. This resource will be shared on our website and Facebook page, so do check those out. Those who brought their own portfolios with them also gained some constructive feedback from the groups. In this informal environment, the chance to think out loud and suggest ideas was a fantastic way for participants to gain confidence in creating or improving their own portfolios. Not only did the participants go away with lots of ideas, but we also learned a lot too. And don't forget, if you want to run your own satellite meetup portfolio event, then don't hesitate to contact the Icon EPN group at iconepn@gmail.com for help or any resources. We want to see many more events like this happening up and down the country. Well, there you heard it. You should definitely try to do one of these near you, if that's something that you're interested in. So I'm here with Tamsin today. Tamsin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Tamsin. I work at the Museums Association, but I've worked in the culture and heritage sector for about 18 years.
Wow, well done.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
That wasn't supposed to be a put down.
It is really interesting. So when I do sessions around careers or interviewing and I ask people to stand up and say how long they've worked in the sector, there's sometimes an apologetic, I've worked in the sector for 18 years. And I reframe it that actually it's a real positive. There are people that would love
That's impressive. That's something to be really proud of.
Completely. Yeah. So I've worked in the sector for 18 years.
Yeah. Nice. Excellent. I feel like people are apologetic in the other direction when I talk to people. It's like, I've only been a conservator for a year and a half. And it's like, that's a year and a half. Well done.
Absolutely.
Any stretch of time is amazing and we should all be proud of what we do.
Completely. Yep. You're in the sector. You're active. You're contributing.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
a huge success.
Absolutely. So today I was hoping that we could talk a little bit about interviews and because they can be really scary sticking points for a lot of people, but we all have to go through them. So I was hoping that we could have a little chat about maybe how we can be a bit more confident in interviews and things that we can just do to make interviews a bit less painful. Maybe?
Yeah, completely. And I think in a similar way that we shouldn't be apologetic for only working in the sector for 18 months is that once you're being invited to interview, that is a huge success in its own right. So there's a big congratulations around that. The sector is really competitive. There are a huge number of people that want to work in the sector. For you to be shortlisted means that you have been really eloquent in your presentation of your experience, interest and motivation, and so that's huge in itself. And so that the key is to take that success from the written page and then bring it to the performance space, which essentially is what an interview is.
What are some of the things that we can do to maybe oomph ourselves up a bit beforehand, before the interview is even there? What do you think is some of the things that we can think about to make ourselves feel a bit more grounded?
So first of all is to realise that everyone feels that way, and actually having some level of anxiety or lack of confidence, if you use that energy, it can be really helpful. So the key is to make sure that sort of nervous energy around something that you evidently want a lot is used to help you rather than to hinder you. So first of all, one, everyone will feel that way. Two, you need to think about how it manifests itself. So how does that anxiety stop you from performing? So does it stop you from accessing that brilliant written evidence you've already submitted? Does that anxiety stop you from formulating sentences in a clear and concise fashion? Does that anxiety stop you from presenting an aura of confidence? And what does that mean? Maintaining eye contact, sitting up straight, occupying your space. So we all experience anxiety in a potentially stressful situation, and interviews are that. We want to get the job, we want to perform. So there is something about acknowledging that's everyone's experience and then taking a step back and saying, okay, how does this manifest itself? Because depending on how it manifests itself, it depends on what you can do about it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it's about knowing yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you know that your anxiety stops you from accessing your examples, there are some handy hints and tips about being able to do that. So one of the things I know is that I have lots of information that I love to share. So there's a risk for me that, one, I forget what I'm saying. 2, that I go off at a tangent, so you'll need to watch me. And 3, that I'm not as concise in my communication. So what I do is, and this is all handwritten, is I have a table that I print out that has the criteria from the job that I'm going for, pasted in from the job description or person specification. And then I have a really basic structure, and I adopt a sort of a once upon a time approach. So a thumbnail sketch of the project or situation. I then talk about my role within that, and then the result. And then for extra sprinkles and extra success, I also then think about how that experience has either informed my own professional practice, so what have I learnt through that, but equally what has the sector learnt through that. And on occasion I might also think about what the legacy is. So done something, so if I've implemented a project, if I'm applying a new technique in terms of conservation, what has that meant in terms of, has that then been adopted within my organisation as normal practice going forward because I've discovered something that's worked or has saved time or money. So when I think I might be too waffly, that's a really handy technique for me. And I've tried to type it into a beautiful Excel spreadsheet so I can access this learning for multiple interviews. Just doesn't work for me. I have to physically have the pen in my hand, as I do now, and I have to write it down. And that process of writing it down under those headings consolidates it.
Interesting.
And then also the other added benefit of doing that is you get a really clear sense of the amount of evidence you have against each of the criteria. So if you thought you've had a fantastic example, when you write it down as a narrative, you might find you actually don't have as many words, or they're not as powerful. And that would lead me to believe, is that the right example? So it serves a number of purposes. What I then do is go through it again, but with a highlighter pen. So I pick up the most salient points to help me consolidate that. And then I will also either take that full document with me, or if I have time, I'll translate it onto those beautiful A5 index cards that you still get.
Love them.
That I hope they never disappear. Literally as an aid memoir. And I'll be looking at them. I'll be sitting in the office space waiting to be called, and I will have those in the palm of my hand. More as a safety net than anything else, but that also alleviates some of the other anxiety that you might have, which is, am I prepared? So that enables me.
Oh, that's good, because we were talking about, as you might have heard if you listened to the rest of the episode, that portfolios can serve the same purpose, and that they are visual aid memoir that you can look at and go, look, this is what I did here, and then that can prompt you into talking more about the project that's on the page in front of you.
So having that tangible evidence can be hugely positive. There's a positive association with it. You have, and you know your work, your professional work inside and out. You can flick through it before you get there, and even just as a sort of a physical anchor to your success, that's great. You know, you can wave it around. And my other reflections about portfolio, which is why practice is really important, is that it can make you look disorganised. You need to know what pieces are where. Less is probably more. You need to think about the pieces that really communicate multiple points of evidence. You need to identify the pieces that talk to the collection type of the organisation you'll be working with, or the project type that you might be recruited for if it's a fixed term post. And you do need to absolutely practice how you present that to the panel, and as part of that, how you verbally present that to the panel. So how much instruction or description are you going to give, and also be consistent. And that's that's a hard ask.
Absolutely.
I know when I'm in a situation, the adrenaline will be running, so the last thing I need is any more stimulants. So I make a decision not to have coffee the morning of an interview, because the last thing I want is anything anything else that will accelerate my speech, increase my pace, affect my cognitive abilities to recall information, and sometimes that's a risk for me if I have too much coffee. So I purposefully don't have caffeinated drinks before an interview. The other thing that I do before an interview is I make sure I have a good night's sleep the night before the interview. So in my experience, people often talk about saying, I'm going to have an early night the night before my interview. The reality is that you're often so excited or terrified around the prospect of the next day that you're not going to get a good night's sleep. You'll go to bed early, but you won't be tired. You will wake up intermittently thinking, especially if you're having to travel for an interview, are you going to miss your train? Are you going to have an anxiety dream of turning up somewhere without your portfolio and naked at the same time? So you often don't get a good night's sleep the night before.
Yes.
So my advice would always be get a good night's sleep the night before, so that you're most well rested, you're less sleep deprived when you actually get to the point of interview.
Yeah.
A few other things that you can do could be around visualization techniques. So if you have been successful in the past, to reflect on what those success factors were.
Yeah.
And they can be anything. So there's no judgment. So I have a lucky dress. I also know that I probably have now, I get a nervous rash when I get excited about talking about things I'm passionate about, and invariably if you do well at interviews, often you are talking about things that you're passionate and excited about, but that can be distracting, or people can make assumptions about that. So they can say, well, she's very nervous, or what would that look like if you're speaking on a panel? So again, just to ensure that I don't feel that my response to a more pressurised situation is leaching literally out of me, I wear high collars and things like that. Other things might be around just reminding myself that I've nailed interviews before, not catastrophising, not thinking about what's the worst case scenario, thinking around it being a two-way process. I'm interviewing them as much as they're interviewing me.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Even though it doesn't always feel like that.
Yeah.
So I think there are a number of things you can do beforehand, never mind sort of positive affirmations on Post-it notes around the house or any other sort of ritual or rite that makes you successful. Can I share one more reflection about that in the moment? And it's about just being human. So if your mind goes blank, if you become overwhelmed, if you become emotional, sometimes that happens, then just to acknowledge that. The reason I can't think of an answer is that this job is really important to me and I really want to be part of this organisation. Or I'm sorry, can you just give me a couple of minutes just to get in the zone where I'm able to answer? So having that personal insight, also having that honesty around how you're responding to that particular situation can go a long way, because that demonstrates really good self-awareness, really good communication style, and also a professionalism. So just think about that, and maybe have a tissue in your pocket just in case.
Yeah, just in case. Well, thanks very much for talking to us today, Tamsin. Really appreciate it.
A pleasure, and I just hope everyone's successful, because if you're doing something you love, then everyone benefits.
Good luck, everyone. You can do it.
Completely.
Hello, my name is Tregaskes, and I'm reviewing Always Time for Coffee by Kate Minchin. Kate Minchin has worked in the museum sector for over 20 years, including working at London's Natural History Museum and Hampton Court Palace. The book is aimed as to be a guide for frontline managers, team leaders and supervisors, so really applicable across the museum sector and beyond into manufacturing and really anywhere where people management is an essential skill. For me, my overall impression was this book really highlights skills and talent within the museum sector, and particularly within the front of house sector of the museum sector. We see stories and experiences from museum professionals across the sector who have worked alongside Kate at different points in their career, really highlighting a breadth of skills available and experience within that team. This really highlights how important front of house are to museum sector and are often undervalued. For example, overall undervaluation of people management, we see reports from in the introduction really shows you the level of training available and in reality the lack of training available. In the Harvard Business Review, a survey showed 77% of respondents saw frontline managers as important to reaching frontline goals, while 78% said they were important in achieving a high level of customer satisfaction. But in reality, only 12% said that organisations invested sufficiently in frontline managers. And this is something which we see in the museum sector as well. For example, front of house in museums, a survey from 2018 highlighted that 49% of front of house staff are undervalued compared to around 12% of back of house. This book, I feel, really helps demonstrate the skills in the museum sector and really is a great tool for developing skills for the rest of the museum sector. Shows how skills from front of house could be shared to other parts, such as conservation, such as curation, where people management is still just as essential. There is experience within the museum sector as well. Beyond that, the book is ideal for anyone to read. It is full of useful information and takes a very practical approach to frontline management, particularly around people management. It's a book which understands the importance of yourself and the people who are working for you. The book balances, for example, the need to get training for your team and developing your team, even expecting them to move on to your career, but also expecting people to be a point where they're happy in their careers. It really helps to understand that people are going through careers at different rates and are happy at different levels. You shouldn't be judging someone for not being ambitious. You should be expecting people to have a wide range of levels of career engagement. It also highlights the fact that you need to give time for yourself. The book is called Always Time for Coffee. It's about taking that bit of time to have a sit down with someone. This is something I've really taken on board, about understanding needing to have those personal times to have a coffee, to have a think about what I've done and what I am going to do. But also when I'm wanting to talk to a volunteer, wanting to talk to a staff member about doing it in an informal, friendly environment, going outside the building for lunch, for example, or sitting down for a coffee in a quiet place with a volunteer to talk about how they want to develop. I found those elements of this book particularly useful because it helped me justify those ideas and also helped me understand how I wanted to be as a manager, about the importance of not emulating someone else, but about emulating what you want to be and being yourself. Something which I think gets conveyed much more effectively when you are working with people is who you are. If you're trying to be someone else, people will see through the facade. But if you're being yourself, people will see you for who you are. So really, yes, I do recommend the book. It is really useful. It's available on Amazon at the moment, and it really does bring together the whole different elements required in frontline management. There's plenty of experiences and a lot of insight from Kate in nice little chunks, which you can take and read at your leisure. The book is really, I have found, useful, particularly at my point of career where I'm starting now to manage people, currently volunteers. There's been a really useful insight into people management and giving an idea of what makes a good frontline manager, and has helped me discover what I want to get out of it, and has started helping me shape how I manage people.
Dear Jay, what is the best way to go about obtaining a PhD in the conservation field? Does conservation need more people with PhDs? What universities should I look into? Perpetual student goes on to say, I've noticed that most programs actually focus on conservation science, focusing mostly on chemistry and physics students than in cultural heritage conservators. So I'm maybe not looking in the right place? ?
Hi, dear perpetual student. Thanks for your inquiry. Like many of our very smart listeners, you've got lots of questions into your question. The first question about doing a conservation PhD was which university to choose. And I would advise you, rather than pick a university, pick a topic and use that topic to look for your supervisor. So if what you want to do is conservation science, then you must have a reason why you're interested in it. Is it that you want to do analytical work? Is there a particular material type that you're interested in? Is there an approach or a philosophy? And use that to narrow down where you look. I think that a PhD is such an intense contribution from you that the relationship with you and your supervisor is going to be so important to your satisfaction, your outcomes, and just, whether the whole experience is positive. The next thing you asked was, what's the best way to choose a PhD in the conservation field, I think, the best way in. And I guess my honest answer is the best way is a funded way. If you can find a PhD where someone's prepared to give you a cost of living or pay for your fees, then that has to be a factor to take into consideration. Otherwise, can you connect it to the job that you're in if you are in work at the moment, so that perhaps you could do it part-time, or at least that you have some connection to a specific goal? So look around at the PhDs are on offer. I'm not sure what country you're in, but there will be various clearing websites where you can look up where funded PhDs are being offered and advertised. If you are in the UK, then some of the doctoral partnerships are good, where they work between universities and employers. They're quite nice because they're going to be very grounded, and you're going to have good access to samples or case studies, because that will have already been, the way will have already been cleared. Then you ask, does conservation need more PhD students? That is a very interesting question, because I guess it depends what you're really asking. Does it need more people with PhDs? No, I don't know that we do, but do we need to have more ideas and more answers? Yes, we certainly do. We certainly need to answer more questions. There's just so many unanswered questions in conservation, whether it's what is the best way to prevent this thing from corroding, or what is the best way to identify the meaning of this object, or how can we express this concept more clearly? How can we find out what the public really thinks that dust, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, or how the dust affects their enjoyment? There's so many questions. So I think we need more ideas, we need more research, we need more thinking. However, in terms of employability, I don't think there is a massive demand for PhDs in terms of your ability to get the job. So if you're looking for employment at the end of your PhD, then I think the doctorate in and of itself may not be a routine except for in academia, but the topic that you've done will be the routine. Has the thing that you've studied and thought about is it taking you on the road that you want to go down? You said that you noticed that most programs concentrate on conservation science, chemistry and physics, and to some extent they do. I did do a little bit of research for your question, and the American Institute of Conservation have identified in amongst their sort of the employability study, or their study of people who work in conservation, that basically while 70% of the profession have masters, fewer than 2% have PhDs. And in that tiny number in 2014, only 0.7% had PhDs in conservation, whereas a massive 1.6% had PhDs in other topics. So it seems that you're twice as likely to end up in conservation with a PhD outside of conservation, but we are talking very, very small numbers. So I don't think it's the most hugely relevant thing to do. And then your last question was, am I looking in the right place? And I think this is the most interesting question, because with any career, with any choice in life, with any fees that you pay or time that you spend, this is 3, 4, 5 years of your life that you're giving to something. It has to be important to you. It has to mean something to you. It has to take you, it doesn't have to necessarily take you to a defined goal, but it has to take you somewhere that makes you happy, that gives you satisfaction, that scratches an itch, a place you want to go. So is it the right place? Are you looking in the right place? Only you can answer. Because very few people who end up tremendously successful knew where they were going in the first place, knew exactly where they were going. What they do is they pursue their dreams, pursue their interests. And above all, I think we all want to have had happy and fulfilling lives. So if you are doing a PhD to improve your chance of getting employment in practical conservation, I'm not sure that it will have a huge impact based on the data. But if you're doing a PhD because you've got questions you want to answer and that you really want to spend time thinking about them, then fantastic. Follow your dream, because even if you don't end up exactly where you thought, I'm sure you will end up using the thinking and the time and the space that you created from doing your PhD. So I don't know if this answered your question. I guess my answer is always to everyone. Follow your dreams. Do the things that make you, you, because that's the best way to spend your life. Over and out.
If you're enjoying the C Word and would like to support our work, then please consider becoming one of our patrons. For as little as $1 per month, you can help us keep our episodes online and more of them coming. Patreon helps us meet our regular costs for the show, and also to plan ahead so we know roughly how much of a monthly budget we've got. That's super helpful when you're trying to do something special, like buy a better microphone or save up to go to a special event. Your support also helps keep us free of advertisement. In return, our supporters get access to our archive of extended episodes, which you can only access on our Patreon page. Yeah, for that $1 a month, you get a little extra audio enjoyment. We've crunched the numbers, and it's about 10% extra content on a regular basis. Well, that's not bad for less than a cup of coffee, eh? If supporting us sounds like something you'd like to do, then head over to patreon.com/thecword and join our bunch of absolute champions. Patreon shout out! Welcome to our latest patron, Amanda. Thanks so much for joining us. And now for some comments, questions and corrections. First, we've got an email from Philip who says, firstly, thank you so much for your work in making the podcast. I'm relatively new to it. I'm currently working my way through the past episodes. Very much enjoying it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Phil. I restore furniture and other objects for a well-established company based in Stockwell. I've had 10 years experience in many aspects of restoration and the making of furniture. I have learnt entirely at the bench and have no restoration, woodwork or related qualifications. I've learnt a lot from my colleagues, however, and I've found that more often than not, they're very set in their ways. This is why I find the forward-thinking and progressive ideas in conservation very interesting. I wonder how easy it would be for someone like me to switch to a career in conservation. Ooh. Perhaps this might make an interesting episode. Differences in restoration and conservation, qualifications, transferable skills, crossover in techniques between the two and how we can learn from each other, etc. Look forward to hearing from you. All the best, Phil.
Ooh.
Oh, thanks so much, Phil. Yeah,
that's really interesting.
I think this is a really good one to talk about in this episode because obviously we've just talked about portfolios and how to get jobs.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was a good adjacent one. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so I wish I could say that this would be easy for you, but it's probably not going to be easy. I think there is a really important place for people with traditional craft skills and that sort of thing. I totally do. Because I think that goes under equivalent experience when people ask for a degree.
Yes.
And in fact, you might be able to find that an employer agrees with that and would employ you on the basis that you've got equivalent experience. Mm-hmm. They might then ask you to go on some additional training courses for more of a grounding in conservation. And they might be able to help you fund that if you're really lucky. Or it might be that people come back to you and say, you don't need a qualification in this because of your experience, but we would like you to go away and do some courses in conservation maybe. And the dreaded volunteering word comes to mind, where you might want to volunteer with someone who is a conservator. Like, just try to pick up some of those skills. Obviously, you say that you already restore furniture and objects, so you're already working in a restoration adjacent industry. But for, say, museum conservation, there are slightly different rules that apply, which you've probably gathered from listening to the show. So it might be a good idea to brush up on those in some way. That doesn't have to be a full-on degree course or anything, I think, because obviously I just think that it sounds like you have tons of experience already, and it's more about reframing things like ethics and just getting to know how you work in a museum. So I might look at some things like West Dean courses maybe.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking as well.
And there might be some just basic online webinars that you can take in, like the basics of conservation and stuff like that. Even that on your CV might, help you, I think. And it could help you be able to answer interview questions in a conservation friendly manner. And I think you should also be honest with employers that if you want to go into conservation, that you're willing to learn on the job, etc. And of course, ICON is also working on the apprenticeship scheme, which might be an option eventually down the line, because that's going to be good for people with a really practical background like yourself. I'm trying to think of other things.
So I have one thought about this. That is, it's coming off the what Jenny's just said about the role of craft skills and those sorts of specific skills in conservation and in restoration as a sort of vocation as well. I know a lot of engineers, people who have started off as engineers or mechanics that work in conservation, and they are basically conservation mechanics or conservation engineers of big stuff and of industrial machinery. I don't see why it should be different for things like furniture conservation, because all different kinds of conservation is so different. I couldn't do furniture conservation, for example, because I'm not a woodworker.
Yeah.
So I don't, there's so many different roles and skills that you can have and that are useful, that, you know, I don't see any problem with operating in the same way, but within the framework of conservation ethics. That isn't that difficult to learn. And also I think it's worth saying that conservation ethics as a topic changes over the world and from person to person so much, and just based simply on the things that people have done. Like, I feel like from Cardiff, we had quite heavy conservation ethics. That was quite, you know, present entirely in our education. But I know that I've worked with people before that just either don't consider things or don't hold things with the same weight of value as I do. And while we can say one thing is good or less good, I don't think that, you know, there is no right answer when it comes to conservation ethics, because it's still an ongoing discipline in itself. So I suppose, you know, learning how to think in terms of conservation ethics, being more aware than less aware, always having that question mark above everything you do is always a good first step to that. And I know there are short courses. And there's conservation internships. And if you were to join the Icon furniture group, that's always a good place to start.
Good point, yeah.
And then you can start communicating with people like that, because maybe things like work placements or simply working with a furniture conservator, you know, once a week, as probably, let's face it, volunteering, as you said already. Start relationships. The big problem, or one of the big problems within our profession in terms of skills sharing, is that concern with being seen as rubbish, or being seen as like, oh, this person doesn't know the rules, kind of thing. Who is this person? They don't know the rules. But we can't, you know, especially in objects conservation, I feel like I'm personally constantly thinking, are there rules to photograph conservation that I just don't know about? Are there rules to this other type of conservation that I'm just not aware of because I haven't done a specific discipline degree? So I think the more communication, the better, basically.
Yeah.
And there are things out there. So don't feel disheartened, though it might not be a totally easy road. It's just best to be open, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think if you ask around, people might have more thoughts on it in the furniture conservation kind of industry. And I think best of luck, really.
Yeah, good luck.
Yeah. I think
interesting observations as well.
Yeah, I think there is scope for it. And especially since you seem to think that conservation is progressive and interesting, I think that there's totally a place for you in the profession, and that you will absorb those ideas, you know, like the ones that we're talking about. So good luck, Phil. And next up, we've got an email from Johanna in Germany. Who says, I'm a paper conservator working at a large museum for drawings and prints in Germany. We have a lot of lending going on. I've had my permanent position for 20 months now.
Congratulations.
Yeah. And have already been on 17 courier trips in that time.
I shouldn't blaspheme. Oh my, I can't do any exclamation.
Good luck.
Wow.
Of course, sometimes things go wrong. Someone once dropped one of our drawings. Luckily, the actual object wasn't damaged, just a frame. Sometimes the hanging fixtures don't work, and I myself once put an object in the wrong frame that didn't fit onto the stand that the Borg Museum had made especially for this loan. I'd consider myself quite a chill person, and as Jenny said, I think it's one of the best ways to deal with things like that. Stay calm and professional, try to make competent suggestions, and you will eventually come up with a good solution together with the staff of the borrowing institution. Also, not everything that goes wrong is essentially bad. I once arrived in London with the loans just to learn that the exhibition space wasn't ready, and they had to postpone the installation by 5 days. I still don't know why they couldn't foresee this 1 or 2 days earlier, but it was the first time that I was in London, and I got to stay in a nice hotel over the weekend, paid for by that museum, so I didn't complain. I've had a very stressful courier trip where I had only 4 hours of sleep, or spent 12 hours on a truck.
Oh my God.
I once got sick on the day before going home and found out that being on a plane when you have a cold hurts your ears terribly. Oh. I've done that. I did that with swine flu once. Do not recommend. No. But all things considered, I absolutely love this part of my job, and I wouldn't give it away for anything. Seen cities that I wouldn't have travelled to in my own time, and I've flown on a freighter from the USA to Germany, and was allowed to sit in the cockpit during the landing.
Oh my God, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, it does. And probably the most important thing, I love chatting with other conservators, usually to find out that we're pretty much all the same kind of guys with the same kind of problems.
Right.
That feels incredible.
I love us.
It's so good. That's really amazing. Thanks for sharing that, Joanna. I'm sure loads of people out there feel the same way. I'm glad you enjoyed the couriering episode. And if anyone else has any experiences they'd like to share with us, we would love to hear from you. You can reach us the usual ways, basically. So, yeah, get in touch, guys. And thanks so much for writing in. Thanks for listening. We're The C Word, and you've been listening to Julia Jabłońska, Christina Rosaic, Chloe Rumsey, and me, Jenny Mathiasen. Join us next time for an episode about touchy-feely things. In the meantime, check out our website at thecword.show, tweet us at The C Word Podcast, or simply email us on thecwordpodcast@gmail.com. The intro and outro music is Spring by Didi Music, used under a Creative Commons Attribution License. Additional music and sound effects by Callum Robertson. This has been a Wooden Dice production.
Perfect. Sorry, Fox is standing over us, twiddling with the sound. What's it called?
They're knobs.
They're knobs. Yeah, that was quick.
You're welcome.
A quick descent.